Welcome back, Storymakers. Sean Avery here with the next lesson in the Children's Book Council Make Your Own Storybook Competition. Now, at this point, you should pretty much have your first draft, probably your second draft of your writing completely finished. You've done your thumbnail sketches, so you know kind of what your pictures are going to look like, and you've considered your layouts and compositions and all that. And in this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about your art style that you choose to create your final illustrations with. Now, there are many different ways that you can approach your illustrations and many different mediums you can use. You can use paints, you can use pencils, you can use textures, you can use photographs, found media, tons and tons of stuff, guys. And what's the right thing for you to choose? Well, I'm going to show you some examples at my desk, and I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of using different types of media. So let's do this. To my desk. All right, guys. So when you're approaching your final illustrations and you're trying to decide what kind of medium should I use to create my final artwork with, the first consideration you've got to make is what do I have access to at home? So, do you have textures at home? Do you maybe have access to paints at home? And if you don't have paints and you don't have oil pastels or whatever it is, that's fine. I'd suggest just using what you have around you, and that'll usually you can usually make do with what's around the house. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sort of go through all these different materials here. I'm going to talk a little bit about them, the benefits, the pros and cons of each one, and then I'm going to show you some examples of some picture books where artists have used these specific materials to create their art. So the first thing I want to show you are Posca paint pens. Now these are kind of more on the expensive end of the scale. You can buy these from places like Officeworks and art stores. They come in a huge variety of colors if you buy the really big packs. They are pretty much like textures, and they contain paint inside of them instead of ink. So the color is very vibrant. They're very satisfying to color in with. You'd want to do these like to maybe use these for really bright bursts of color. Like if you wanted to have a bright pink character, using a marker like this will make your character really pop off the page. Then you've got your pencils, colored pencils. Depending on how hard you press with these, it'll obviously make them darker or lighter. You can get some really interesting shades. You can make things look quite natural with pencils. So if you were doing kind of forest scenes or whatever, and you wanted to do lots of intricate details, colored pencils are really good. They're also really cheap, and most people have a set of colored pencils at home. Oil pastels, these are one of my favorites. These are super bright. Well, these are kind of dirty ones, but they still work really well. They are super bright, super vibrant. You can cover large areas with these ones and make things really bright. They are quite messy, and the problem with them is that you can't really get into those really tiny details. So I like oil pastels for doing kind of larger areas. And same with chalk pastels. So these are like oil pastels, except instead of kind of slimy feel, sticky feel, they're kind of dusty like chalk. Now, these are great for when you want to cover big areas. Like say you want to do like an ocean scene, maybe you want to use quite a bit of blue. You can sort of you can rub them along and smudge them with your fingers, and they sort of blend really nicely together. So those are really good for sort of larger areas and broad details. Watercolor paints, you can, depending on the size of the brush that you use, you can use really little brushes for really fine details. Really nice for bright, vibrant colors. You just got to make sure that you use a thicker stock of paper, because obviously if you use really thin paper, you put water on it, your paper's going to kind of crinkle up. So we'll talk about different types of paper as well. You've got acrylic paints. So these are kind of like the paints you might have used at school. They're sort of blobby and a bit squishy, kind of like the sort of the texture of maybe slime. And these are really nice for really bright, kind of vibrant colors. They can be mixed with water too to cover really large areas, which is awesome. Then you've got your marker pens. I really like to use Sharpies and fine liners. I like to use, if I'm using fine liners, I like to have at least two types of thicknesses, a skinny one and maybe a medium one, and then a slightly thicker one, like a chisel tip like that. And these ones are pretty cheap. These are really great, guys, for outlining areas, outlining your characters, making important details stand out. I use these a lot. They're kind of my go-to. And then, of course, you've got different bits of paper that you can use you can cut up and tear and use glue to create collages with. You've got tissue paper, which is quite see-through. You can sort of overlay tissue paper on top of each other to create some quite interesting effects. You've got, bits and pieces. You can see someone was obviously using this paper to cut stars out, and I think this is like wrapping paper. So you can get some pretty interesting effects, if you want to create maybe a background or cut out some interesting little things, these little avocados, you could cut them out and stick them on a table to make it look, like a breakfast table or something. So you can use paper in really interesting ways. I use a lot of collage work in my art. Now, depending on what medium you choose, you will create a different feeling or vibe within your illustrations, and it really changes the mood depending on which one you choose. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a look through some picture books and show you how artists have used these different materials and what the results are. The first book I want to look at is my own book, All Monkeys Love Bananas. Now, when I wrote this book, I decided that it was a really fun, bouncy sort of book with lots of movement and lots of energy. I imagine these monkeys kind of jumping all over the place and banana peels flying. So I thought I wouldn't use something soft like chalk pastels, which would look like a little bit soft and a little bit kind of more relaxed. I wanted something with really hard edges, and I wanted it to be really bright and really bold. So I decided these were the materials that I would use. Number one, I used pens. So like I said before, I chose two pens of varying sizes, a small one and a medium one. For the main outlines, I used the medium one, and for the really fine details, all the monkey's fur and all these kind of little lines over here, I used a skinny one. And I actually added digital color to these ones to make these bananas really pop out. So I mostly did black and white with just a little bit of color popping through. But if I didn't use digital color, this is what I would have chosen to add my color in. Some Posca markers to make those bananas really pop. So you can see, guys, that those really hard black lines and those really bright pops of color make this story a funky, sort of playful experience and feeling about it. Now, this is a book by a West Australian author illustrator named Kylie Howarth. It's her first picture book that she released. It's called Fish Jam. Now, Fish Jam is it's a story about a fish that is that plays music and sort of goes around, and all the other fish don't really appreciate him. But the illustrations for this one also just like mine, has a little bit of digital color and a little bit of digital illustration. But if you notice the backgrounds over here, these backgrounds were papers that were created by Kylie Howarth's two sons. So they actually took bits of old sea sponge and seaweed, and they sort of splashed it onto a piece of colored paper and created all these wonderful textures in the background. So once she created those background papers, she actually drew her pictures over the top of those. And this is kind of like almost like a digital collage. So you can see over here, there's actually bubble wrap that's been dipped in paint. So I'm pretty sure it was something like acrylic paint that kids dipped bubble wrap on, and then they pressed it to a piece of paper, and then she sort of chopped it up and arranged it to create these beautiful illustrations. And you can see that she hasn't done the very, very dark outlines. So she's got sort of her characters have sort of a softer, more sentimental vibe about them compared to my very dark outlines in my book. Sticking to the theme of Western Australian author-illustrators, this is Kelly Canby's picture book, The Whole Story. Now, Kelly Canby for this one has used inks to give it a really kind of soft, whimsical feel. Over here you can see that ink is really versatile. You can mix water into it to make your colors lighter, or use it straight from the bottle to make it darker. She's also added in some pencils, some pencil marks for to create crisp sort of outlines for like the hair. You can see there's a bit of pencil over there. She's mixed in a few pencil plants over here just to mix it up a little bit. So you've got some soft elements, some hard elements. It's a really nice kind of mix up of different techniques here. So another great example of mixed media being used. Jeannie Baker is an Australian author-illustrator, super famous, well known for her collaged work. Now, this is a story called Grandmother, and what looks like an illustration, like a drawing at first glance, is actually a very, very intricate setup, a collage that she's made using bits of fabric, bits of found materials like sticks and leaves and wood and cardboard and all sorts. So you can see this little girl over here. She's got her jumper made out of fabric, and it gives a really nice sort of homemade, comforting feel, which really suits the tone of this book. It's of course, title's Grandmother. It's about this grandma over here and this little girl that goes and visits her, and it obviously a ton of work, but really nice to kind of build up almost in a sculptural sort of fashion. So if you think more three-dimensionally and you like to use your hands to cut things and stick things, this is a great style for you to think about. A classic here, The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Kyle. Now, Eric Kyle uses tissue paper and this very, very thin paper, and he tears it apart, cuts holes out of it, uses a little bit of paint as well, sticks it together, creates collaged work. So you can see there's a whole bunch of things going on here. You've got a bit of paint in the background, so he's obviously painted this night sky over here, and he's stuck bits of tissue paper to create things like the leaves and the branch of the trees. So a few different mixed media things happening here. And guys, you can see really, really simple designs. It's not complicated at all. It's got very limited detail in it, which is great. That's all a very simple story like this really needs. So it's just about a caterpillar eating his way through a bunch of different fruits and vegetables, and the simple illustration style reflects the simple story. Australian author-illustrator Patricia Mullins has got a number of things happening in this story over here. So she uses black pens to create very stark outlines for her, or at least in this book, for her characters, for her animals, and then she creates a background using torn up tissue paper in a similar way to Eric Cole. So she tears up little bits of paper, sticks it in the background. So it's kind of a nice contrast there where she's got very detailed characters, but almost like an abstract sort of background. And you can see there's even some photo elements in there. So she's chopped out pieces or photographs of real branches and stuck them in there with her cut up with her cut up and torn up tissue paper. Illustrator Oliver Jeffers has created the Day the Crayons Quit illustration. He's obviously illustrated with crayons, which makes sense, right? Because the story is about crayons. He's done it quite his illustrations quite roughly, and that reflects that sort of shows the texture of a crayon. It feels like it was all done in crayon. The actual characters themselves, I believe they've been painted with acrylic paints, and then he's actually drawn in some of the details using a pencil. So lots and lots of great techniques being used here, and of course it's really, really appropriate, for a story about crayons to have the illustrations. Two stories from Leo Leone over here, and you can see that again, your illustrations don't have to be very complicated at all. Look, this is Little Blue. It's literally just a blue dot on the screen. Here he is at home with Papa and Mama Blue, so more little dots. And he's got his friends. So you don't have to be this incredible artist who can create these photorealistic drawings for your illustrations to be effective, guys. It's more important to be creative and to be flexible and to have lots and lots of variety within your drawing. So you can see, even though it's little dots, the dots are doing something very different every single time. This is a book called Let's Make Rabbits. It's about a pencil and a pair of scissors that want to make that get together, and they decide that they're going to make rabbits. And the pencil obviously draws a rabbit, and the pair of scissors makes a rabbit. So it's appropriate for him to use bits of paper to collage and to draw with a pencil his rabbit. So they're the two characters over there. So this is a story called Robot Zombie Frankenstein by Annette Simon. It's all about robots. Now, when I think about robots, I think about something that's made in a factory. A robot's been produced, it doesn't have any organic curvy sort of lines. It's very rigid, squares, circles, hexagons, octagons, for nuts and bolts. So Annette Simon has been very clever with her use of shape over here, and she's used this is a digital illustration, but you can use collage to do this, or you can take a ruler and draw up a whole bunch of squares and rectangles and whatnot, and trace out some circles to create very simple robot shapes. So really great, really simple designs, nice bright color, and it really works, those geometric shapes for her characters. So Beck and Matt Stanton, very, very simple illustrations again. What makes this one quite exciting is also the different colored pages, which is really cool. That's something you can think about, maybe have one or two pages that are really bright and then some that are just plain white. The plain white pages kind of give your eye a little bit of time to rest, and then the colorful pages sort of can be the more kind of exciting, eye-grabbing or more eye-grabbing pages. So yeah, very, very simple line drawings colored in with they've done digital color, but you can use texture, oil pastels.
Okay guys, now that you've seen a few examples of different types of media that you can use to create your illustrations, it's up to you to decide to pick an illustration medium that is gonna work really well for your book, and one that you have access to, obviously, and one that will, I guess, set the correct tone for your story. So happy illustrating, guys, and I will see you next time. We will start to talk about putting the final book together.